Thanks. So I want to start. I'm an anthropologist, and it can kind of seem strange for an anthropologist to talk about the big picture of education, that kind of thing. So I want to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. As an anthropologist, I'm interested in very large time frames, usually tens of thousands of years, and I'm also interested in a global perspective. So I want to start by literally setting the stage for that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a timeline across here to give a sense of where we are today. So I'm going to make this a 12,000-year timeline. So I'm going to start over here. And so by the time I'm over there, I'll be in the present moment. Here I'm 12,000 years ago. The reason why I'm starting 12,000 years ago is because this is the moment when humans started to come together into slightly larger groups. It's a wonderful question actually emerging now based on new evidence, whether farming came first or the large groups came first. But what we do know is that about 12,000 years ago, almost everybody on the planet was living in basically the same way. Everybody was hunting and gathering their food, living in relatively small bands. But as we start this story, and this is a very dramatic story of all humanity, so we're going to have some music here as well. Do we have? There it is. So here comes the dramatic story of humanity and where we sit in this. So as I take my first step, this is when humans start to come together. Somebody starts planting their own crops. And this allows all kinds of other changes to occur. So the settlements start getting larger and more settled. People can actually grow crops for many other people, so you have the emergence of the division of labor. All these people are able now to innovate and share their innovations with one another. By the time I'm halfway across the stage, we actually have cities about the size of Manhattan, Kansas, where I'm from, about 50,000 people. And in the next step, we start to get the emergence of writing. And as I walk along here, that writing allows for larger and larger empires. By the time you get here, you've got this more innovation spreading. You've got the Silk Road emerging. You've got Indian trade ocean emerging. And by the time I've got just one step left, there's a lot of changes that have happened, and yet none of the changes speak to anything that's in this room right now. All of those changes happen right here. And not just about what the room that you see around you, but even why we're here, the fact that we're here. Because for 11,000 years, nobody was going to college, really. There weren't the whole experience of nobody going to having a high education, let alone a higher education. That all happens in this last step. So now if I put my foot down, and it's really just this last half step where you see all these changes, I could go through all the things. I can mark on my foot here where the transportation technologies shift, where communications technology shifts, and all that kind of thing. But I want to focus really just towards the end of my foot here, the very end of the stage, where there are three questions that emerge that almost nobody had asked before. And so nobody's asking them for 12,000 years, and now everybody's asking them. And the questions are, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? Those are the questions that actually bring the students to arts and sciences, right? Those are the students that come to us. They're asking those big questions. Who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? Now, I could also point to something else in the very tip of my toe, and it would look something like this. This is what's in the very tip of my toe, right? Like these new technologies. And I could go on and on about this. There are 3 billion people on the planet connecting and collaborating in ways they've never connected and collaborated before. The way it comes to us is a little bit like a threat, right? Suddenly there's all these free classes online from Canvas to Coursera. So we're going to stop the dramatic music because it's going to get intense now. And this can seem like a threat, right? You have Udacity. You have all these courses being offered. Like here's an introduction to computer science. These are free. They seem like a threat. And yet, you might say, well, come on. I mean, who's this guy? Well, that's actually, that's David Evans, and he's actually a really brilliant professor. So these are actually really high-quality courses that are up there. Clayton Christensen once thought that our education system could not be disrupted the way that other businesses have been disrupted. But he had a change of heart when the University of Phoenix came to him, and they tried to coax him into teaching his class online. And he said, come on, I'm at Harvard. I wouldn't soil my name by going to the University of Phoenix. And they said, well, you'd reach 150,000 people. And he said, so then he goes to his dean, and his dean says, I wouldn't soil our name by allowing you to do this. He said, and then finally the dean says, look, you can do it, but don't do it on Harvard grounds. So University of Phoenix rented out this beautiful room overlooking the water in Boston, and he walks in to give his first lecture, and he looks around and he sees the most beautiful people he's ever seen. And he asked one of them, are you guys really students at the University of Phoenix? And he says, oh no, we're actors. And so like all these people had been paid to basically look really interested in everything he had to say. And then they splice all this together with beautiful graphics, and here he is now, and they cut out all the ums, they cut out all the mistakes, and it just looks absolutely brilliant. You can actually view these lectures online. And if what we are doing is simply about delivering information, as it appears to be so in rooms like this, then we've already been beaten. But we know that that's not why we're here, and that's not why our students are there. Our students are trying to figure out the answers to those 3 questions. We're trying to create the environment where they can address those 3 questions. Who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? This is about inspiring students. The online learning environments are great for students who are already inspired and already know where they're going to go with their life. But we provide so much more than that. We provide a whole environment where they can grow and become the best person that they can be. So when you think of this environment then, the real shift here, the real thing to think about in terms of what we do, is how it might change the way we think about knowledge and the way we think about learning. Because if you look at this environment, and I mentioned, this is 3 billion people connecting and collaborating in ways they've never connected and collaborated before, and that's really just the beginning, because if you look towards the near future, we're headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information, unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices. And that means it's now ridiculously easy. This is a technical term. It's in the literature, sebpaquet. You can look it up. It's ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish with anybody to anybody in the world. That changes the nature of information flow. It changes the way we think about knowledge. It certainly makes exams like this seem increasingly obsolete. And that means, like for me, what I've been thinking a lot about over the last few years is how do we move our students from simply being knowledgeable, like knowing a bunch of stuff, where it's just about information and memorizing and retrieving this information, to being something more like knowledge able, that is able to actually sort through this tremendous mass of information, analyze it, criticize it, and ultimately create new information and knowledge. And as I've been thinking about this, I realized that it's not even just about being knowledge able, it's really about inspiring a sense of wonder. Because when you look at this knowledge environment we live in today, it is potentially the most amazing knowledge environment ever. Seymour Papert at MIT calls it the knowledge machine. But this knowledge machine only works on wonder and curiosity. It works on questions. If you don't have any questions, if you're not inspired in some way, this becomes the world's most seductive distraction device, and not a knowledge machine at all. And so I was back at my school at Kansas State teaching, about 9 years ago, and this is when I first started teaching, and I realized the importance of these questions. I thought back to my own experience, and I had actually been a student at Kansas State myself, and I remember having this experience in a class where I felt like the class didn't give me any answers, but instead it gave me the gift of great questions, and the questions that would burn in my soul and still burn in my soul and still drive me forward and have me wanting to learn more and more and more about everything. And I stopped about midway through this class, first time I ever taught, and I just started listening to the questions people were asking. And I'd hoped that they were asking the same questions that I had been led to ask in a class like that, these questions that burned in their soul. And instead, the questions were, how many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? Like, these are terrible questions, right? And the importance of questions should not be overlooked here, because I think this is really the heart of what we do, especially in the arts and sciences. If you think about what a question is, if you think about the last time you were really into something, really deeply into something that you were learning, something that you were trying to, some sort of great path, you really felt like you were onto something, you'll notice that it wasn't because you thought you had the answers, it was just the opposite. You had a set of questions that were driving you forward. And in many ways, I don't think it's a mistake that the word quest is right there in the word question. It really does feel like you're on a quest when you have these questions driving you. And oftentimes you'll find an answer, but that answer just frames the next question. And that's really the beauty of what we do in the arts and sciences, is how these quests can just go on and on and on. And that's the great gift we could give our students. The second thing I'm going to mention about questions is how they open us up. They draw us into new connections. Just by framing a question, you're often drawing on new connections. But you also think about verbalizing a question to somebody else. It must be the most amazing thing that humans do, that we can actually come to the edge of our thinking and then pose a question that actually draws other people in to our thinking, and that we can work together and think through something together. And then the third thing I'll mention about questions is that you'll notice that when you travel around the world, you've probably noticed that you can always pick up when somebody's asking you a question. And that's because in about 6,000 of the world's languages, there are 70 African languages that are an exception to this rule, but there is a raised intonation in about 6,000 of the world's languages for when you're asking a question. And John Ohala has suggested, he's out at Berkeley, he suggested that this might have something to do with the universal frequency code, that most mammals and several birds do this, in which they will lower their pitch when they want you to tell you to, when they want to say back off, and then they'll raise their pitch when they want to sort of make themselves small and draw you in. So a dog will growl to tell you to back off, but it'll kind of do a to sort of have you draw in. And it could be, this is very speculative of course, but it could be that raised intonation that we see across all these human languages could actually be some sort of signal. And it's certainly the case though that when you ask a question, you are kind of making yourself small, you're opening yourself up to others, and you're kind of inviting people in and saying, let's try to figure this out together. And I think that's the most beautiful thing we could give to a group of students, would be this sense of wonder and this capacity for asking questions. Now, it turns out that wonder is actually very difficult to achieve, and we only have 4 or 5 years with our students. So what I want to talk about today is I want to give you a sense of what wonder looks like. I want to put it at the core of our mission and have us think about what it would be to create wonder in our students. But I'm also going to show you not only what wonder looks like, but also why it's so hard to achieve in our culture, how some school environments are absolute failures at increasing wonder, and in fact, squash wonder. And then we're going to talk about the upside of all this, and we'll look at some places where wonder is actually really happening. So I want to start with my own personal story. My own personal story actually starts in this very room here. If we can bring that back. No? Okay. So in this very room, about 11 rows back, is where I first encountered wonder. And it was by a professor who is basically, in my mind, lobbing intellectual firebombs into the audience. But apparently they were only hitting me because everybody around me was just sort of doing what you do in a big class. You just write down the stuff and you memorize it for the exam. But for me, I was a small town kid from Nebraska, and to learn in anthropology about all humans in all times and all places was basically undermining every basic assumption I had about how the world works. So I was just opened up to the world in a totally new way. And when I left Kansas State, I didn't have all my questions answered, and I realized I needed to go find some answers. And so I decided to go halfway around the world, basically, to New Guinea, to a place that was as different as possible, to see what kinds of answers I could get about how humans work. And so I arrive in the capital city, and this is the first picture I take. As a small town kid from Nebraska, it was kind of a big deal to see like a palm tree. So I snap this picture, and then I put on my backpack and I go out the door that morning, and I'm just excited to greet the world. I can't wait to meet new people who are just radically different from me. There's these two people walking toward me first thing in the morning, and they say, "Hey, Mone," and they speak Pidgin English there. So, "Hey, Mone" could mean good morning, or it could also mean give me your money. And I, being a small town kid, I thought surely they're saying good morning, so I just say, "Oh, morning, morning." And they say, "No, God, morning, morning." And they start tapping their pockets like this. And I'm on to what they're asking for now, obviously, but I decide to kind of play it off and keep smiling, and I just say, "Oh, morning, morning," and I tap my own pockets, and they say, "No, God, morning." And they they step in front of me, and the one guy pulls his jacket back, and he's got this 2-foot machete in there. And so I turn my back, because I got this huge backpack on, and I think if they slash at me, they'll just hit my backpack, and I start running. And these two guys chase me, and I get around the corner. Unfortunately, around the corner were all the wonderful people that I'd hoped I would meet, and they chase these two guys off, and I walk straight to the airport. And so there I am at the airport, and I remember looking up at the board at the departures, and the first departure was to Brisbane in Australia, and I thought, oh, I'm 22 years old at the time, and I thought that would be a great place to spend a summer for a 22-year-old. I could learn to surf, I could, do these kinds of things. And then I looked down the list, and there are all these like little smaller villages, New Guinea villages I'd read about in anthropology books, and I realized that the answers to my questions were not going to be in Brisbane. They were going to be somewhere down that list. And I also remember thinking, like, this is the power of a question, right? Like, great questions will take you places you never thought you would dare go. And so here I was getting on a plane to the center of the island, and I just kept on taking smaller and smaller planes until I came into this airstrip. And once I land here, my money's going to be no good. There's no electricity, no running water. I'll be completely dependent on the people. And so I land, and this is my greeting. And then the plane comes in like once every 6 weeks or so. So the plane leaves, and then I'm back here again. And and I decided to just keep walking. I'm just going to keep going as deeper and deeper into this place. And so I just keep walking, and I come past villages like this, and past this thing, which you're apparently not supposed to be this close to them, and then ended up here in this village. And I would spend a good deal the next, 8 years actually. For 2 years of the next 8 years, I would live in this house here or a house like that. This is the first house I lived in. And I'll just take you around a little bit to give you a sense of what it looks like. They raise their own taro, sweet potato, bananas. They raise pigs. They harvest spiders. After a big rain, they can harvest the spiders and their eggs. Snakes are kind of a good deal. Snakes get lazy after they've eaten, so you can cut open the snake, and then you get the appetizer as well. And this is actually these are my legs up here in the corner. This is my sleeping bag. And we'd just eaten that snake. I've been there about a week when we ate that snake. And I'm looking around the hut, and there's holes everywhere. And so what I used to do is I would wrap myself up in my sleeping bag, and I used to call it My Little America. It was like my little escape. And like for 8 hours each night, I could just escape from this, escape from the bugs and the rats and whatever else might be out there, and just wrap myself up. But it's the tropics, so it gets hot, and the sleeping bag would invariably come off of me. And that very night after we ate the snake, the sleeping bag had come off of me, and I woke up, and I could feel this thing laying across my chest. It's like this big around, just laying right here. And I managed to grab it with my left hand, and I threw it off of me. But as I threw it, I rolled with it. And then I managed to get it pinned down on the ground with my left hand, and I try to free my right arm so I can pin it down with 2 hands, but I can't move my right arm. And it's about this time I realize I've actually pinned down my own right arm, like this. And my arm had just fallen asleep and was across me like this. So now I have to explain to them why I'm wrestling with myself on the ground and all that. and there's like, I could tell you funny story after funny story for the next several months. But the reality is that, and it's a grimmer reality than I even remembered it to be, is that this was by far the worst time of my life. I actually thought it lasted like 2 months. I remember being really depressed there and really struggling for a while. You're very isolated and that kind of thing. But I went back to my journals this past summer, and I discovered that I'd actually been really sad for like 8 months. I didn't even realize how long it had been. And what had happened was that, and I did a lot of thinking about this, obviously. You do that when you're really sad. And I realized that who I thought I was, I guess growing up in Nebraska, I thought that who I was something inside of me. I thought that we craft our identities, and it becomes something inside of you, becomes a part of you, and then you project it outward. And what I realized there was that who you are is just as much reflected back to you by the people around you. And if the people around you don't know who you are or what you're doing, you suddenly start asking the same questions. And it struck me from that moment, like the importance of connections with the people around you. And fortunately, there were some wonderful people there who sort of swooped in and saved me in a sense. One day I was walking along this ridge, and it was just absolutely as beautiful as it could be. I'd always dreamed of being in New Guinea. You know, it's like a major dream of mine to be in a place like this. And here I was walking along feeling so sad, and I had this magnificent view behind me, and I actually just felt more sad because I was like, wow, life is perfect, and I can't appreciate it. So I was just crumbling, and I felt so sad that I actually started feeling weak, and I ended up I actually sort of collapsed on the side of this ridge, and I was crying there. And these two guys who were walking behind me came up beside me, and by the time they got to me, they were crying too. They didn't even know why I was crying, and they were sitting there crying with me. And that was the beginning of the turnaround. They said, why are you crying? And I said, all I could think was that I missed my wife. So I said, I miss my wife. And they started laughing and laughing. They said, oh, we would never miss our wives. and then they said, oh, but we miss our kids. And then they started crying with me again. And it was that sense of connection, you know, that it just felt so real to me, you know, that they could sit there and cry with me. And that changed everything for me. I've never learned faster. It was sort of a combination of being separated from my, you know, old culture, being open to new things, and feeling that sense of connection and trust with the people around me allowed me to open up. And really, I think that's where I discovered this true sense of wonder that I'm so, you know, keen on spreading to as many people as possible now. And here's the two guys there with their kids. And there's another element to this, and that is like that capacity for empathy that they showed at that moment. And the reason why I pull out empathy now is because when you look at what wonder looks like, and you think about, you know, how do you measure it? And there's never been a good measure for wonder. There's a few interesting questionnaires that try to measure curiosity that are trying to get at this. But empathy is an interesting one because empathy is the capacity to imagine your way into somebody else's perspective. And that takes a good deal of wonder, in a sense, to do that. That's an amazing thing for a human to do, to imagine your way into somebody else's perspective. And what we find in our own society, especially among college students, is that empathy is on the decline. There are a number of measures now that are indicating that empathy is on the decline. And you can see that the concern here is that it might have something to do with technology. I'm going to partially agree with that, but I think it's more than that. When you look at in New Guinea, you think about why empathy, the type of empathy you saw that demonstrated these guys crying with me on the side of the mountain, where would that come from? And you could say, well, for one, it is an unmediated world in large measure. They don't turn toward a TV every night or look to any other box at every night. They actually just engage one another. They share their lives. But I'd go a step further and say they don't just share their lives. They share everything, including their deaths. So there's no place to hide our basic frailties as human beings, our basic vulnerabilities, the basic things that make us human. There's no way to hide from those things. And so I remember when, this is my friend Joseph, and we were playing soccer on a Wednesday, and then on Friday he got sick. And, you know, in my mind, people get sick and they just get sick, right? But it's very different when somebody gets sick and you have no medical care anywhere around. So we're all sitting up at night taking care of him. And then, you know, just past midnight, he crosses that line across which he can't cross back. And that's the way I remember thinking about it, was just like, here he was just sick. And I always thought of him as just sick and he'll be fine. And then he was suddenly just gone forever. And there's a tremendous sense of, you really get in touch with your own vulnerability, your own frailties, and your own, like, and you look around at everybody around you and you realize we all share those things. And to me, that's like really the beginning of empathy. That's the birthplace of empathy, is when you recognize this shared humanity that we all have, our frailties, our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, all those things. And in New Guinea, they experience these things quite often. And when we talk about technologies hiding these things from us, I don't think it goes far enough to just talk about our cell phones and our laptops and things like that. I think when you look at technologies over the last 150 years or so, you actually can get a much broader picture of this, and you can actually see how every technology that's been around for these last 150 years had the potential to connect us more to allow us to pursue things in a way we never pursued them before. All the elements of wonder that we just talked about, this idea of like questing after something, feeling more connected, all those things, technologies could actually facilitate all those things, but normally we actually use them to do exactly the opposite. So when you look at how we've used technologies to move ourselves into boxes, to shop in boxes where we don't even know where the stuff came from or who made it. And then we look back to our culture through these boxes. And then over time, we've just moved into more boxes and shopped in bigger boxes and then looked through these boxes. So by the year 2000, Robert Putnam famously said, "We're bowling alone." And he had all sorts of remarkable statistics to point out different ways in which community was on the decline. Or as Olivier de Couture talks about it, he talks about it as the capsular civilization, that we live in these capsules and then put ourselves in other capsules, cars, to get to the next capsule, all the while being largely disconnected from the world around us. And this has really profound implications for the students that are coming into our doors, because they grow up in this world. They grow up in this capsular civilization. This is Peter White. And Peter White talks about what it was like to grow up in the 1950s. This is him sometime later as he's a journalist with the BBC, and he travels all over the world. This is him in Kenya some years later. So this is, in 1950s, he talks about how he was actually encouraged to run all over his neighborhood unsupervised. And so he did, he just ran everywhere unsupervised. Then he got a little bit older and he learned to ride a bike. And then he got older still and he got to be 12, 13 years old and he started hitchhiking. And he would hitchhike 100 or 200 miles a day and then be back by that night. All of these things are just unimaginable today. Parents do not let their kids run around unsupervised, let alone hitchhike 100 or 200 miles. And Peter White did all of this in the 1950s, even though Peter White is blind. And you think about all those things I just said, that he ran around unsupervised as a blind kid, and he was encouraged to do so. He learned to ride a bike, and he had scars to show it, but he was going to do it because everybody else was doing it. And then when he's 12, 13 years old, he starts putting his trust in strangers he can't even see to take him places and know that he's going to get back that night. That's a level of public trust that we just don't have anymore. It's almost unimaginable. In fact, there are some early studies now showing, just trying to measure the amount of space that kids explore. And one of those early studies suggested that kids only explore about 9% of the area that their parents explored, and that has held up for 4 generations. So that today's kids explore 9% of 9% of 9% of 9% of what their great-grandparents once explored. Their great-grandparents might have explored 12 miles. Kids today are lucky if they can get out in their backyard unsupervised. So we have like this sort of leash culture, right? You can actually buy these leashes for your kids. I have a 6-year-old and 3-year-old and a 4-month-old, so I'm very aware of all the baby stuff that's out there for controlling your kids. Just as a comparison, this is a friend of mine in New Guinea. That's a real knife. And so I don't know if you see the difference. So then these kids go off to school, and this lack of public trust is so profound that, of course, it means we have to, I think it's not unrelated to the movements for accountability, the movements for, trying to sort of close in everything, box in everything, and measure everything. And so we end up with kids coming out of school, like this is Erica Goldson. I just want to read you briefly a thing from her valedictorian speech. So she's valedictorian just north of here, up in Georgia. She says, "I wonder, why did I even want this position? When I leave educational institutionalism, will I be successful or forever lost? I have no idea what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject of study as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling, not learning. And quite frankly, now I'm scared." And she's the winner, right? So these are the these are the great students that come to us, supposedly, right? The great students coming to us. And then they come to our schools, and then what do we give them? We shove them into these huge general ed classes that are requirements. And they are seen as requirements. So this video is something we put together a few years ago, just asking a few basic questions about what these walls are really saying. Like, if students learn what they do, what are they learning when they're sitting here? And of course, one of the things they're learning is simply that the information is at the front of the room, and that they should follow along. And so what we did in this video is we just invited, this is my big anthropology class, we invited everybody in to talk about what it's like being a student today. And so I just started a Google Doc with a question, what is it like being a student today? And then the students started editing this thing. And these edits became the video that you're watching right now. You can see a few blank spots there. The blank spots are places where we needed to survey ourselves to get some data, basically. And so we ended up with the following. So this kind of gives you a sense of our own challenges. Large average class sizes, teachers not knowing students' names. And this leads to a sense of disconnection and disengagement. This to me is like a 74% failure rate on our part. And this goes on and on. If you want to see the whole video, you're welcome to watch it on YouTube. But of course, the point is that, if you think about what wonder is all about, the sense of quest, the sense of purpose, sense of connection, and to get there, you have to embrace your vulnerability in some way. That raised intonation we talked about indicates that there is some sort of fear involved in asking a question, and we have to have all those things for these students to thrive with a sense of wonder, and that's just not happening. And even where it does happen, let me take it one more step here. It's not just about disengagement. It's so easy to see among freshmen and sophomore and so on. I think it's even about more than that, because if you look at a class that actually works, for example, you guys may have heard this story from David Hestings. David Hestings, he's out in Arizona, and in Arizona he noticed that his students were doing just fine. His class was going just fine. He had, his students were averaging 80% on the exams. The students seemed to like the class. Like, this physics class is doing just fine. And then 20 years ago, he had some new colleagues come in, and him working with these new colleagues decided to design a new exam, a new type of exam. And this exam was to measure concept knowledge, not formula knowledge, so to speak. And what they discovered was that these students who were finishing a physics course with an 80% on average were taking these concept-based exams and getting only 40% right, which is actually barely better than chance. The questions on this new exam were things like, you have two metal balls and they're the same size, but one weighs twice as much as the other, and you drop them from a building, which one lands first? This is a very, very basic concept of physics, and yet only 40% of students could get this right. That suggests then that these students were actually learning how to take a physics class, not physics. They were learning, in a way, how to do physics word problems, but not how to actually think and understand physics. So Eric Mazur, who's out at Harvard, said, oh, that might be true out in Arizona, but I'm at Harvard. And, and so he gave the exam to his students, and he got the same results. So you have these students, even at Harvard, really good students, who can basically take a physics class and do really well in a physics class, but don't understand physics. That, again, is this element of disconnection. It's the same basic problem that we see whenever you see this sort of disengagement. There's a disconnection, not just in terms of attention, but a disengagement from the actual learning process itself, or what really matters in the learning process. So how do we change this? I'd like to suggest a basic metaphor that we can all understand to center us a little bit. And it goes back to the way humans have learned for, as long as humans have been around. It is, and that is basically through play. Humans have always learned through play, but I don't want to think of it as play as like this unserious thing. I want you to think about play as actually the real heart of learning. And let me just share with you some sense of what play looks like. When people are at play, I'm talking about informal play, not like formal game, formal sports and so on, but informal play. What we find is that they immediately have a sense of co-ownership because they're actually co-creating the space of play itself. And this isn't just physical play. Sometimes it's mental play. Sometimes you're just having a fun conversation, for example, playful conversation. People have a sense of co-ownership of that space. Creates a sense of connection. then you have a sense of trust that starts to emerge because of that sense of connection. Then people start taking chances because they feel safe taking chances. That increases novelty and ultimately elevates engagement, which then cycles back into the whole thing. So this is actually a positive, sort of virtuous cycle that goes on and on and on, and actually can recreate itself and strengthen over time. And there are a number of lessons you can learn from play that are actually very different from the lessons you would get, say, in a large lecture hall. Lessons from play are things like, for one, it elevates and rewards beginners. There are many studies now coming out of social psychology showing that novices perform far better on task when they feel like they're at play rather than feeling they're being assessed. It also challenges all levels. So a playful environment allows for people to get playful and challenge themselves and elevate their own engagement in different ways. It also builds and broadens perspectives. And it does this because when you're in play, you are naturally more open to new ideas. You don't feel constrained like you have to get something done in a certain way. You actually feel wide open to new possibilities. There's also a really interesting element of play in that it encourages empathy. I see this with my own kids. So I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they like to play. And the 6-year-old is really good at empathizing with the 3-year-old because he knows that if the 3-year-old starts to cry, the play is over, right? And so the 6-year-old is always monitoring what the 3-year-old is thinking and trying to see it from his perspective so that he can modify the rules a little bit if he has to so the play can continue. And that actually leads to another interesting element, and that is that the structures and rules are arbitrary and changeable. That's a wonderful lesson to learn about how the world works, actually, in a way. This idea that the structures and rules are arbitrary and that we can change them. That's not the case in a traditional classroom. Another thing that's learned in this is that conflict is normal and can be resolved. It happens all the time. And of course, failure is normal and can be overcome. These are all elements that are not strongly present in classrooms and often are actually quite the opposite in classrooms. So the question then is, how do we bring these elements of play into a classroom like this, even a very large classroom? How do you bring in a sense of co-ownership, connection, and trust that can lead to people taking chances, increasing novelty, and elevating engagement? And this is, I'm going to take a chance with you guys, and I'm actually going to basically invite you into my classroom now. And instead of telling you a way to do this, I'm going to try to show you how to do this. This is going to be very crazy, so just bear with me for a second here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something. I teach classes that are about this size. My classes are 200 to 400 students, and right now I have 400 students. So this is not unlike my class. Here we have 500 people. And one of the things we do early on in that class is I try to center them in what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I'm going to try to do the same thing with you guys. So it's anthropology is the study of all humans in all times and all places. And so welcome to my class. This is Anthropology 204 at Kansas State University. Here we go. So what we do in this class is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a moratorium on the taboo against staring. And what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to be able to turn around and look at one another. And I want you guys to just really look at one another until you can see through to the humanity of the people around you, right? Because this is the study of all humans in all times and all places. And we want to get in touch with what it is to be human. So we're going to call that moratorium starting right now. And you just go ahead and look at your people around the room, look anywhere you want, and just stare at them. Just really look at them like you've never looked at them before. All right, and start to work yourself into silence. I know this will be hard at first. You'll want to giggle, you'll want to it'll feel awkward, but let yourself drift into silence as you're looking at one another. You coming to look at me? This is good. All right, now work yourself into silence for a moment, and we're going to have a sacred moment together. So go ahead and taper it down until we have total silence. try to get to that place where you just start to see, just start peeling back the layers. I mean, in some ways, like as you look at people, you might first feel watched, right? And you might feel like this sense of, you might feel a sense of being judged. But at the same time, you're looking at other people, and your first experience will be to judge them as well, right? Even like minor judgments, not that they have to be very critical, but you're sort of sizing them up. You're thinking about who they are. But try to see past all of that, and just peel back those layers until you just see the human. And there are a few things that can help you in this. Like, if you think now, like as you scan the room, 500 people, just based on basic averages, we're looking at 500 people. Somebody that we're looking at in this room probably feels like they just found the love of their life, like in the last week or so, right? Or maybe you have like 5 loves of your life or something, right? So one of their loves of life, at least, I don't know. And then, but somebody else probably feels like they lost theirs. Somebody in this room has attended a birth that meant something, really something to them. It's a grandchild or maybe even a child, just in the last year. Somebody else attended a funeral that was absolutely devastating. And this is us, right? This is who we are. We're so small, and yet when we share this like sort of terrible, beautiful, very small life together, and here we are like all in the same room. So now I want you to like continue just to like picture these 500 people, right? And I want you to, and we're going to change it a little bit. And what I want to do now is I want to pretend as if this is the whole world. And so we have in this room basically representation of the entire world. Each person would represent about 16 million people. And this is what it would look like. We'd have 109 people from China, 87 from India, 65 from Africa, 23 from the United States. 8 people in this room would be dying, 15 are pregnant. And one of you would be in the U.S. about to give birth, and one might be in sub-Saharan Africa. The child in the United States will have 10 times the chance of surviving birth. There are 165 Christians, 133 Muslims, 76 Hindus, 61 of various indigenous religions, and 85 non-religious. There are 157 sheep and goats, 117 cows, 75 pigs, 15 camels, 10 horses, and 907 chickens. And I say all of that because that's to say that we have more than enough food to go around. In fact, we could feed everybody 3,500 calories a day or so, and yet 79 people in this room are starving. About 183 people sometimes go to bed hungry, and there are 106 people who do not have safe water to drink. If we averaged everything out, we could make about 15,000 a year, but the way things actually work is that there are about a fourth of you who are making over 37,000 a year and are in some ways what we consider middle class. And yet there's a fourth of you in the room who are making less than $2 a day. So the core of this class that I teach is really the question of why. Why is it the case? Why do we have those inequalities? How are we going to take the next step in our journey? How are we going to face environmental crises, energy crises, domestic violence crises? You can name any number of crises out there. And the question is like, how are we all going to make it? It strikes me that every class has a why, but we've totally forgotten what those are. They've just become like a list of requirements that sit in our curricula, sit in our list of requirements that we go through during advising. And a lot of students end up in these classes having no idea why they are actually required to take these classes. And it seems to me like as arts and sciences, we need to start redefining what that is and reclaiming a much stronger mission. And I'll make the case, I think that there are a set of questions that we address that are very close to a set of questions that the students really care about. the students really care about those questions: who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? I think arts and sciences in some ways addresses who are we? What are we going to do? Are we going to make it? And so in my class, I mean, we kind of try to address that, and it's going to look a little crazy here what we end up doing. But I promise you, all of this came out just from a deep reflection on what is this all about and why are we here. And so one of the things we do in my class is we actually try to design a simulation of how the world works. We try to simulate how we ended up where we are today. How did we end up with half the world making less than $3 a day? How do we end up with all these people hungry? How do we end up with not enough clean water for people? Those types of things. And so what it looks like is we create a game using a Google document. We all brainstorm how this is going to look. The students study all kinds of different social theories, theories about how the world works, and we put them all together into the rules for a game. And then it basically looks like this. This is, we spread out all over campus. This is just for one class. So don't think like we're wasting tremendous time. My dean is here, so I don't want to get in trouble. So students have like marshmallows. Some students have marshmallows, some have straws, and some have rubber bands. They trade these things so they can create little marshmallow-tipped arrows that they can go hunting with. And so basically all these people are living these, something like an indigenous life kind of thing. But then here come the people with the guns, and they have these PVC pipes here. This part of the simulation was designed to test out, in a way, Jared Diamond's guns, germs, and steel theory. And so here are the guns. And if you get shot by a marshmallow, you have to freeze. And here come the colonizers here, coming in the background in the blue with a PVC pipe. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to control the trade of the rubber bands and marshmallows and straws so they can create these necklaces like this. Okay, so over time then you end up with all kinds of other things happening, like you end up with environmental crises, like here we have a straw shortage. Really?
There's one more group. Dang. What do we got for straws up on the hill?
They're out too.
What's that? You guys want to go with them? You're desperate? You need a job? What happened here?
So now we end up with like a labor market, right? People basically have to work to survive. They've lost their capacity to produce food for themselves. And in this case, these people have actually gotten, taken off as slaves.
And they're coming over to work.
So all this looks like a great deal of fun, and it is. The students love this. They get deeply engaged in this. But the beauty of this is it actually sets the stage for a discussion of how the world came to be the way that it is. And this becomes, it actually creates a very lively discussion. Here you can see towards the end of our simulation, it all just sort of worked out and followed world history fairly closely in this case, because this is essentially a world war erupting in Europe. Global resources are on the decline at the same time. And all of this is happening very organically. This is based on some just basic principles that the students put in place for how the world might work. They created rules for economy, rules for diplomacy, and so on. And all of this just takes place from these very simple rules. But the beauty of this really, though, is that the students are no longer, they get in a playful mindset, first off. That's the real key. And it's not just about playing out there, right, out on campus. It's about when they come into the classroom, and now they're in a playful mindset. They have this idea that it's kind of apparent that we actually don't know how the world came to be the way it is. There's a lot of ambiguity about how the world came to be the way it is, but there are a lot of really interesting theories that we can play with and test and argue about. And the best part about this is the students stop thinking about what do we need to know for this test, and they start thinking about what do we need to know for this test of our lives. And in the meantime, it also changes the dynamic of the class, right? It's not just about the expert delivering the object of knowledge to the amateurs, as Parker Palmer demonstrated sort of the traditional model here. It changes into a living subject where there's a living conversation that's happening, and the students become co-knowers, so to speak, and co-learners together, engaging with this subject. This leads to a really interesting discovery by Eric Mazur, which was when he had this crisis of realizing his students were not learning physics concepts. He learned that the best teacher in the room was actually probably the student next to the student who didn't know the concept. What he started doing was, instead of lecturing, he would ask a question, and the students would, half the students would answer one thing and half the students would answer another thing, and he would say, okay, turn to each other and convince the other one that you're right. And as they did this, 10 minutes later, everybody in the room had the right answer, but more importantly, they actually understood the concept. And they did that because the student who just had to wrestle with this new concept was the best person to teach the concept to somebody else. So this style has started to spread. You start to hear about flipped classrooms a lot. So you see at Minnesota, for example, in their biology classes, they come around in groups of 8 people, and they try to apply the knowledge they're learning in biology to projects. They try to create new projects. At MIT, you see the same thing, where they're actually starting to change the way that they design large classrooms so that it can facilitate this type of group work. In my own small classes, I've done some more experiments where I try to really see what it's like to allow students to really explore exactly what they want to do. So in this class, this is a class on it's methods in anthropology. And what we do, though, is we just say, let's create a documentary together, like a great documentary, and it's going to blend together all of your interest. And so we all sit around for a couple weeks, actually, thinking about what our core interests are, what kind of project would we like to do, and then we try to weave those projects together into one large documentary. So instead of a syllabus, we have a research schedule that anybody can edit, and that research schedule just blows up. Students get so interested in pursuing their own passions that this thing gets so big that you just can't even manage it. So students actually started their own blogs, and they would write their own syllabus on their blogs. Here you can see the first one that got posted. This student assigned herself 4 books in 5 weeks. You know what happens when I assign 4 books in 5 weeks? But these people are really excited about this, and this spreads, so more students start doing this. Student after student assigning themselves 4 books in 5 weeks. And we have a lot of success with the videos we create because the students are really into it. But I think more important than that is the change you see in the students. So this was a moment, this was a class period where I couldn't be there. I might have been at USC, I can't remember. And the students wrote here, this is one of the students, she says, we put a lot of good thoughts together in class. It was one of the sweetest class periods I think I've ever been a part of. No teacher. She says, crazy, right? It was actually really sweet. We had the whiteboards covered with spiderweb diagrams, lists, and connections to the ideas we were all posing, and so on. But my favorite part is at the end, she says, we're always being shaped, always learning. What is learning? I'm learning right now, processing, learning how to communicate my thoughts, typing speed increasing. This is a moment of awakening for her, right? This is a transition from somebody who is just getting the grade to somebody who is really learning, really deep into something. And that has a profound effect when they enter into this world of so much possibility, where there is more information available in the air all around us than has ever been stored in any library. You look at somebody like Sean Ahmed, who's another college student at Notre Dame, who was inspired by Jeffrey Sachs, who said we can end poverty in our lifetimes. And Sean thought, well, maybe we can, but it's not going to happen with me just sitting in this room. I need to go do something. And he had a lot of skills that he could leverage. So he moved to Bangladesh, and he started making videos about how people actually live in Bangladesh, how poverty actually looks. He started making all these videos, and in the process, almost 300,000 people started following him on Twitter. And all these people wanted to help. And so he started leveraging everything he knew about the web to create this.
You guys, through your votes and video responses, will decide how I will be spending some of this donation money.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean.
We donated. We were very, very glad to do so.
Here is my vote. Rebuild the school.
Thank you.
You hear the music there. That's a really, the music is interesting because it actually is coming from this website called OP Sound. And OP Sound is a music collaboratory, basically, where people from all over the world can contribute their music. So this is Colin Muchler here on guitar, and then you'll hear, he's in Washington, and then Cora Beth over in the Carolinas hears it and adds her violin, which you can hear there. And then Vavrek here grabs hundreds of other pieces that other people have added and adds it. And so this music that you're hearing that becomes part of the background music for Sean's video is itself a collaboration of all these people who are finding their voice and sharing their voice in some way. And the beauty of this is that, you know, metaphorically, I like the metaphor of this, is that when we help a student find their voice, find their passion, they share it in a way that actually makes it much better than the sum of its parts. So here's another example, again, a musical example. This is Eric Whitaker, and he did this online choir where he filmed himself conducting a choir and then invited anybody from around the world to join in, and 185 people from 12 countries join in. And again, think of it metaphorically, though. I like to think of this as the metaphor of like what happens when we set a student off, when we let them find their voice, and again, like it's the layering, right? It's not just that one student. It's that they join this whole choir of other people. And this is also can be very serious, right? So, for example, in Kenya in 2007, after their elections, all this violence broke out, and these 4 Kenyans got together, and they created this website called Ushahidi, which means witness in Swahili. It allows people to send updates by their cell phone about what's happening on the ground, and then receive updates based on where they are as well. So when traditional media had sort of fallen apart, this allowed 46,000 citizen reporters to report on what was happening. And then they gave it away so that 3 years later, when the Haiti earthquake happened, these students at Tufts University were able to implement the same platform, and they called it Ushahidi Haiti. And they started receiving messages from people on the ground in Haiti, first a few hundred, then thousands and hundreds of thousands. Messages that say things like, "We're looking for Gaby Joseph, who got buried under Royal University." And then these students are able to map these things so that people, they're actually using a map that's not Google Maps, they're actually using OpenStreetMaps, which is itself a collaboration of thousands of people around the world tracing satellite imagery. That's the map that's actually on the ground, helping people like Clark Craig from the US Marine Corps, who says that it's saving lives every day. I wish I had time to document every example, but there are too many. I say with confidence there are hundreds of these kinds of success stories. The Marine Corps is using your project every second of the day to get aid and assistance to people that need it most. So let me now end with this, kind of an image of what these students might look like an image of wonder itself. So this was a couple years ago in Wellington, New Zealand, where it never snows, and then it did. And what strikes me about this is it's like it captures this sense of wonder that we've all experienced now and then. And what I want to propose to you is that maybe we can give people not just a sense of wonder in a moment, but something that they could live with for their entire lives. So one of the things you'll notice is that people are not bundling up. They're not running out of the store, into the stores. They're actually running out of them. This is an embrace of the world. And that's what wonder feels like, right? It's an embrace and celebration of the world. You feel more connected to each other and more connected to the world around you. There's a way in which in this, if you really develop this capacity for wonder, like even a simple walk can feel enchanted. And there are really two sides of wonder. Sometimes we talk about feeling the sense of awe, like being in wonder, and sometimes we talk about wondering about something. There's a moment where this inspiration turns to investigation. And I think that those two things actually are directly connected, so that we don't need to worry about giving students too many answers, because the answers just frame the next question. We are driving them further into this world in which every moment feels new, like they're a child again. In wonder, you start to see connections that you maybe didn't see before. But my favorite part about it is that every little thing starts to matter. Studies on curiosity and wonder have actually shown that it's the one thing that you can really change about a person. Even if people arrive in our institutions without a sense of wonder, it's something that you actually can give to them, and I think it's probably the most important gift that we can give. Thanks.
I think we need to have your dean stand and be recognized as well for putting up with you. I can't see from here. Where's your dean? He's heard you before. He figured he could skip this one, I guess. Michael, thank you so much. That was just really fun and inspirational. Now, speaking of technology, very modestly, we finally have a mobile application. It's not an app, but if you want to sort of look at the program or the program at a glance, things like that, it's ccs.net. Should come up /m mobile, and then go to pages. And I think if you look for hashtag CCS 2013, you should be able to get those pages. So I hope that's helpful for you. This hotel does not provide wireless access unless you pay for it in your room. But we, knowing how much you want to be, wired, we purchased 200 access points for this floor. So it means you can't all jump on the internet at the same time. But if you need to get on the wireless network, it's the hotel's wireless network, and the password is CCAS13. Like I said, there are only 200 spaces, so don't all go at once. If you have a data plan, use that instead. So anyway, next we will have a break, and then we'll start our next sessions promptly at 10:45. And I think everything else is in the program. Enjoy the conference. Take advantage. Great to have you here.